Welcome to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast, the platform that dives deep into the stories, insights, and strategies of the semiconductor industry.
So sometimes I think I have a little bit of a non-traditional career path. I want to make games. When I was in high school, my parents decided, well, it's time for you to do a job. I wanted to spend my time programming things, maybe a few months. And if I fail at creating an app in the App Store, I'll go work at Walgreens.
Wow.
That market became pretty saturated. You need to make the machines more accurate, control the processes really well. A lot of times, though, you think it's going to work.
It doesn't end up working, yeah. If I'm hiring someone in a specific field or area or department, I'm not hiring them for me to tell them what to do.
Right.
I'm hiring them for them to tell me what to do.
Usually when someone tells you, that's not possible, or or you have a supplier tell you, impossible, you might have a good problem. I feel very strongly about this in chip design, for example. There's been a lot of renewed interest in packaging with the CHIPS Act.
Meet Craig Bishop, the visionary CTO of Deca Technologies, who is at the forefront of semiconductor innovation.
With a background in software development, Craig has pioneered groundbreaking advancements in adaptive patterning and maskless lithography, redefining the landscape of the industry.
Today, Craig will dive into the crucial role of software in chip design and share his insights on the exciting future of technology.
Hello, and welcome to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast, the platform that dives deep into the stories, insights, and strategies of the semiconductor industry. I'm your host, Salah Nasri, and whether you're an industry veteran, someone who's just curious about semiconductor manufacturing, this podcast is designed to bring you valuable lessons from the brightest minds in the field. From cutting-edge R&D to leadership strategies to global market trends, we're going to explore it all. But before we get started, I want to ask a sincere favor to you all out there. In 2 months, we got 2,000 followers. By the end of this year, my aim is to get 10,000 followers. And this time round, we are changing the game. I am interviewing great minds in person, one-to-one. So please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube or Spotify. The more followers we get, the more interesting and dynamic this podcast will become. And it will really help us keep bringing the best conversations in the semiconductor world, just like this discussion that we are going to have with a special guest today. And in today's episode, we are being joined by Deca Technology CTO, Craig Bishop. Welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Craig, everything has a beginning. And I want to go right to the beginning of your career. So you started your career at Big Hill Software as a software developer, correct?
That's actually a little bit down the timeline.
Is it a bit down the timeline? Okay, so where do we go earlier on?
So sometimes I think I have a little bit of a non-traditional career path, but that's maybe a little more normal. So ever since I was a kid, I've always been obsessed with software, programming computers, and making them, because computers, this wonderful thing. It's these little bits of components that you can play with your hands and arrange and make it do things. Then when you learn to program, now you're programming all these little bits of components to play a game, do something spectacular. And ever since I was a kid, as soon as I could use a computer, I became obsessed with programming that or do what I want. And then pretty quickly what is this made out of? It's made of all these little pieces, right? These little resistors, capacitors, things like that. Plus it helps. My father, he worked at Intel.
Oh, really? Your father worked at Intel? Wow, what was he doing at Intel?
So he started in the Fab 12, actually, out in Chandler.
Wow.
And he moved on to manage some things in the Fab and then in IT. And luckily, that was lucky for me because he could bring home a Visual Basic 6 license. Learn to play.
I remember those.
Yep.
I remember those days. Yeah.
And so very early on, I was very focused on, I want to make games because that's how you program things that your friends can play with. And then I want to make electronics that will run those games. And so actually, this led to a hobby of creating game consoles, creating games on those game consoles. And in fact, my now boss, Tim, our CEO, he was a neighbor for a long time. And back in, whatever that day was, I think I was 11 years old, I actually set up a lemonade stand on the sidewalk outside our house. But we weren't selling lemonade. We were selling a web browser that I had programmed.
Are you serious? Wow.
And,
wow, that's epic.
So we had little, remember those CD read-write?
Yeah.
You buy at Costco?
Yeah.
And they came in like 5 different colors. And,
Yeah.
And you get the little stickers that you could draw your own CD label.
Correct, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And, so after that, actually, when I was in high school, my parents decided, well, it's time for you to get a job, actually venture out in the world of a working person. And Mom said, why don't you go down the street and apply to Walgreens? And I went down there, and it seemed kind of like, I don't have anything against Walgreens. I shop there often, but not what I wanted. I wanted to spend my time programming things. So this was the same time that iPhone was launching, the first time you could actually create custom apps.
Okay.
And so I asked my parents, give me a few months, and if I fail at creating an app for the App Store, I'll go work at Walgreens.
Wow.
And 6 months later, I had an app in the App Store the first day it was open. First day you could buy an app. And a year after that, we sold over 50,000 copies.
Wow.
So,
wow. What was the app?
It's called Homework.
Homework.
I was a student, and it was a homework planner. So you could input your classes. You could track your different assignments.
Was it free download, or did you charge it?
No.
You charged as well? Oh, wow.
This was in the days where you could actually charge money
Yes.
for an app.
Yes.
So
yes,
it was, I think we launched at $10 a copy, which, at the time.
That paid more than Walgreens, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Days. Wow.
And you think, wow.
You did this yourself? You designed it, or did you have someone with you that was designing this app? Or?
So, under the age of 18, technically, it's much harder for you to form an LLC and business and do all that stuff. So, actually, some friends of my dad had wanted to start a business and doing something like this for a long time. So we formed what we called Mango LLC. We thought, well, Apple's a fruit company. We're a fruit company. This will work.
Really?
And it worked out pretty well for a couple of years. And we had that market became pretty saturated pretty quickly.
So take me back. So in this moment, so you got 50,000 downloads, right? Yeah, it's a decent pay. Right?
Yep.
10. I mean, how much was the App Store taking in those days?
Well, they take a 30% cut.
30% cut, so you would take 70% of that.
Yep.
It's a decent pay.
I don't know. Pays for college.
Big time. Yeah. And so you proved your parents wrong.
Well, they, I say that, but they were also an investor early on. I said, well, and give me a few months and help me buy a MacBook. You had to have a MacBook at the time to make apps for Apple.
Okay.
But I promise if it works, it'll pay back the laptop and more.
Paid more than that. Wow, that's absolutely incredible. That is so then from that perspective, what happened after? So
so the App Store became very unprofitable.
Mm-hmm.
The more and more developers involved.
Were you creating more apps after? Or?
I tried.
You tried, okay.
And but creating your own apps actually ended up being very unprofitable. So the business was contracting for others. And that's where I ended up at Big Hill Software as my first resume job.
Right, okay.
And a lot of that focus at the time, the real high profit stuff, was putting all this game programming knowledge to work. Because a lot of people wanted to create fancy 3D graphics or games on a mobile device. But to do that, you had to have really efficient 3D math routines, doing all these multiplications, world transforms.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who knew how to create the app they wanted didn't know how to do those specific parts. So that consulting business for a little bit, really good. And I continued using Mango LLC, and it's great learning how to, negotiate terms of contracts, learning how to succeed on delivering, and how to fail.
Yeah. How many times would you say you failed?
Oh,
in comparison to succeeding, like a ratio.
I had some pretty good learning experiences at the time.
Yeah,
but you want those early on.
Absolutely.
So, like one case, I had I was a teenager, so I had a contract that was mostly bullet points, and that was one of the biggest paychecks I missed out on. So you learn.
Yeah,
but
c'est la vie.
After that, I was looking to go to college and decided, well, I've spent all this time in software world. I kind of want to go the electronics side and actually get formal education on that side of it.
Yeah. So, that was part of your education experience. Yeah, you did electrical and computer engineering at the University of Arizona, right? How did that influence your journey from software development to, of course, eventually becoming a CTO at Deca Technologies?
So it turned out all those things were intertwined.
Okay.
So I had been working on a home-built game console.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim, the founder of Deca, CEO, he was actually, came over for a beer one night. And I showed him this game console I'd built from scratch. It's an ARM 7 CPU from Atmel. Still remember the part numbers. 1891 4008R. 32-bit ARM core, and it used a Cypress dual-port SRAM. He was advisor to TJ Rodgers at Cypress.
No way, really? Tim Olsen?
And that's
wow.
That's where he went on to with Cypress funding Deca for the first round. Yep. So he saw the Cypress part and this homemade game console.
So TJ Rodgers invested in Deca at that time?
Oh, yeah.
At that time? Wow.
So Cypress was originally, Deca started as a subsidiary of Cypress. So this was back when SunPower was TJ's big success.
Yeah.
For taking them up to over $1 billion, and Deca was going to be the next iteration of that.
Wow.
Yeah. So
this is truly connecting the dots, right?
Yeah. And so for me personally, what happened was I was going off to study electrical engineering. I decided, okay, I'm not going to be a game programmer anymore. I want to be an analog IC designer. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And all the equations and physics, I'm going to do that. And at the same time, Tim was starting Deca about a couple of years in, and this is how early he saw this coming. A couple of years in, he said, this fan-out wafer-level packaging is going to change how we do things. And one of the biggest problems seems like a graphics problem. Seems like something you could help. And that's what we now call adaptive patterning. And really that's sticking things down where you expect them to be, and like placing a die, and it moves a little bit, because there's tolerances, mechanical tolerances, process tolerances. And it turned out most of the industry at the time was saying, well, we need to make the machines more accurate. We need to control the processes really well. We need to model this. And Tim and another one of the early Deca guys there, Chris Scanlon, he was their VP for a long time.
Chris Scanlon, very well.
Uh-huh.
They're Bessie now, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Then their crazy idea was, well, what if we let it move and we change the pattern for every chip on the fly with software? Correct for it. So we actually put software in the middle of a critical manufacturing process and correct for these things on the fly. And of course, that sounds a lot crazier, but they had just implemented the first maskless lithography for wafer level packaging production. And Deca was actually the first company to ever do this. So maskless lithography, we call it laser direct imaging. It's actually really common, printed circuit boards and that kind of thing. But Deca was the first time been pushed to fine resolutions like 10 microns, 8 microns, that kind of scale. And so they had the foresight to see, wow, we could really use this for, besides reducing our mask costs, iterating really quickly, we could do something special with this.
Right.
And they took a chance on hiring me, basically said, all right, let's do a proof of concept. See what happens. And actually, that leads to one of my most fun stories from the early days of Deca. Was I was in college when working for Deca, going to school to be an analog IC design engineer, and still trying to run some of my consulting business, and that was way too much. And in the middle of that, Tim invited me. He said, "You need to come to our next board meeting up at Cypress headquarters in Bay Area, and we need to demo the progress on adaptive patterning." And I was dumb enough at the time, or unwise enough, to decide to do a live demo in front of the chairman. So it ended up being fly up there, and there's a rush of preparation, and the morning comes for the board meeting, and to do the demonstration, I had to plug in my laptop. My laptop was hooked up to all the software to do the computation for a live demo, and I had to go up to the front of the boardroom table, right next to TJ Rodgers, chairman of Cypress, chairman of Deca, CEO of Cypress, founder of Cypress Semiconductor, one of the titans of industry, sitting right there. And okay, I'm gonna do a live demo for you. And but it worked.
It worked.
Oh,
wow.
To this day, I feel so lucky it worked.
Wow.
And he, at the time, he said, "Wow, this is like digital wire bonding." Someone in the room said, and I got a nickname that day from TJ Rodgers too.
And that
Because
was?
they asked him, "Where'd you find this guy?" "Oh, well, we made this game console using one of your chips, actually." And so TJ said, "Oh, GameBoy."
I called you GameBoy. Is that your nickname with him? Wow.
And he asked me that. He said, "What chip?" So, and I told him right off the bat, and I don't remember that one, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a 128K dual port SRAM, but I don't remember the name. And he immediately looks at one of the staff around. And he says, "Hey, come here." And he whispers to them. And they went running out of the room. And later that same board meeting, this poor person comes walking back in through the door carrying a dev kit for one of the new chips. And he's like, "GameBoy, here's a PSOC development kit. You can use this for your next game console."
No way. Wow.
So
Wow.
that
is legendary.
Short break. I'd like to let you all know I am the president and CEO of the International Semiconductor Industry Group, a global leading association that gathers leaders and executives in a trusted network. I'd like to invite you all to the International Semiconductor Executive Summit, Southeast Asia, on November the 5th to the 6th. It'll be held in Penang, Malaysia. The lineup is sensational, as always, at any ISES event. We have Kok Tiong Ung, who's the SVP and Managing Director of Infineon Technologies Kulim, Yvonne Kyle, the Senior Director of GF Operations, Koen de Bakker, Corporate Vice President of Smart Manufacturing and AI at Micron Technologies, Dr. Jin Young Kim, who's the Senior Vice President of Global R&D and Strategy at Amcor, and there's many great other companies with leaders representing them from Schneider, Electric, Inari, SSIA, Airspace, and so on and so forth. So it's a great event. The link is at the bottom of this video. Please do check it out. Click it. If you have colleagues in the region, do forward it to them. It's an incredible summit to participate in. And it's also backed by the Penang Skills Development Center, PSDC. So you can also claim some money back to join. Other than that, let's get back to the show.
Would you say that's your proudest achievement of your career?
It's up there. It's up there. So, but
that is epic.
So that was in the very early days, and at that time we were figuring out, hey, we're gonna change the pattern for every chip on the fly, and it gives us a lot of really cool things. We can optimize for variations. We could do things people don't normally think of, like when you have a mask-based reticle, it takes you, even if your mask is inexpensive, like on a packaging process, it still takes you weeks. We could create a new mask in minutes. So we could run experiment after experiment, iterate incredibly quickly. We could do things like have different patterns on the edge of the wafer and tune them really fast. So we had a lot of fun experimenting. How could we really use this outside the traditional way of thinking?
So so looking back at that specific time, right, in that specific moment, what's one lesson or experience from those, what one would call it for you, formative years, that possibly continues to guide your decision making today?
I would say trust experiments.
Trust experiments.
I learned to be very skeptical of my engineering judgment and have a high trust in experimental results. A lot of times what you think's going to work,
it doesn't end up working. Yeah. That's insane. You joined Deca as a principal software engineer in 2012, right?
I left Deca.
You left Deca in 2012 for a couple of years. Okay.
2018. But I actually joined as a co-op, a student intern.
Okay.
And technically, I was a Cypress employee first, because Deca was still under Cypress.
Was that right?
Yep. But
but did you see? Did you see like a significant change from doing a technical role going into a leadership role?
Oh, absolutely. So that was a decades-long journey, and it's been a lot of fun. So after those early days kind of creating things, it became time so in 2016, that was a pivotal year in Deca's history. That's when Qualcomm, their biggest public end customer, they were surveying the whole industry looking for their next big packaging platform. And they really needed something to replace first generation fan out and some WLCSP smartphones, and then move on to more advanced chips years down the line. They were even already talking about server processors at the time, which, they planned pretty far ahead. And they decided they really liked Deca's technology. And their packaging team loved the M series, the fan out structure. They loved adaptive patterning and let things become very economical. One of the key points about previous gen fan out was that die placement and that tolerance is the number one cost on the Pareto. So when you're looking at future generations, that was a big problem to solve. And they loved it, but our little factory wasn't big enough to supply, the gigantic billions of units that a giant like Qualcomm ships. So that's when they and ASE together invested almost another $100 million in Deca. And critically, ASE became our first technology transfer and licensing. And nowadays they produce 35,000 wafers a month of it in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, we start this technology transfer, and things got real very quickly. It's one thing to run a software system at your company. Well, really a software fabrication method, equipment, it's an integration of all these things. And now I have to do it somewhere else. And they're going to run billions of units doing this. Mm-hmm. So that was an entirely different learning curve, as it became, okay, we can't rely on, this person knows how to do it. It's the manual says how to do it. We can't rely on that person knows to look for that and check to make sure these are connected. it's the software checks that automatically. Even language difference in the Philippines, where our fab was, most people speak amazing English.
Yeah.
You go to Taiwan, a lot of people speak really good English, but you have more challenges. And also we had to grow the team. So that's when I started managing engineers instead of being an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And that by itself is it's a really, really fun transition in your life. Mm-hmm. But, in fact, just today, I was talking with one of the software engineers on my team, or software engineering managers on my team. Mm-hmm. And it's really funny now to see someone going through their own version of that transition, going from being a technical contributor to a manager. And a lot of it's actually about learning to let go. And you hired these really smart engineers for a reason, right?
Right. Let
them solve the problem. And most of the time, they'll solve it better than you would have. Mm. There's a reason you hired them.
Yeah. I live by that rule. I mean, it's one of the key things is that, if I'm hiring someone in a specific field or area or department, I'm not hiring them for me to tell them what to do.
Right.
I'm hiring them for them to tell me what to do.
Right.
What was the point of hiring them in the first place? Unless I'm trying to delegate some of the work that I'm doing at the moment, right? But do you feel, when you're hiring, as weird as this sounds, but do you look for people that are just similar to yourself?
I think
in the way mindset.
I think naturally, so we all probably do that a little bit, but I try to hire people that disagree with me on some things, some key things, because it's valuable to have people who complement your weaknesses, but not just your weaknesses, but also your blind spots. So, we're naturally predisposed to think about a problem a certain way, or think that, that's not possible. Because equipment doesn't work that way, or whatever it is. When, it could, and someone who has a different perspective, comes from a different industry, comes from a different learning experience, they can really point that out for you.
I mean, you're looking at, of course, you having worked at both as a software developer and in semiconductor packaging, so I'm intrigued to understand from you is how do you see the intersection of software and hardware evolving?
On a personal level, I think I was incredibly lucky to be the right skills at the right time with the right overlapping interests of semiconductors and hardware and software, and couldn't have asked for a more fun path. More broadly, I think as an industry, we're actually going to be heading more in the software direction going forward than the traditional, process equipment and other engineering. That stuff stays important. But if you look at the overall history of semiconductors back in, the 80s and 90s, when it was powering the first computers and arcade machines, that it was the materials, the process technology develop, enable new things. Then the designers design new chips that enable new things. Those new things are used in new software. If you look at what's happening today, you have plenty of transistors for most things.
Sure.
Of course, an AI chip needs as many transistors as it can get, but for many things, we have enough. And it's now the software determining what do I need a chip to do, and what the chip needs to do, determining what process I pick. Because a lot of chips don't go to leading node processes. And so things are actually becoming more software driven than hardware driven. And sometimes I think of it as semiconductors are becoming infrastructure. And we're probably a little uncomfortable with this as an industry, because sometimes it can mean my product release isn't the headline. It's whatever software that runs on my chip is now the headline. But it's a good thing, because it means that we have enabled so much that now we're not just solving what immediate most important problem can these new physics or new manufacturing solve, but it's the long tail.
Yeah.
It's all these other specific problems where I can create specific solutions, and it's actually economical to do that now. But you asked specifically about software in our industry, and that's where I think in the US especially, we have a lot of software engineers. And so what would be pretty powerful for our future is if software engineers can help more with designing chips. Because software is where the chip is used at the end of the day anyway, right?
Right.
We have a lot of software engineers, and we don't have enough chip design engineers. So I think a lot about how can we enable more and more software engineers to design chips.
Absolutely. So at Deca, you're guiding the company's technological direction. So as your theory is the key to stay ahead of the curve in such a fast-paced and competitive industry, the focus is going to be on the software.
I think that we can benefit a lot by borrowing more and more ways of working and concepts from the software industry. Because if you look for an industry that moves very quickly, in a very complicated domain, right? So like people joke about all the tools you use to make a website, they're obsolete next year, and you have to relearn everything. So, or what you use to make an app, like I couldn't make an iOS app nowadays. All the tools have changed so drastically. And so it's a very complex industry moving very quickly, and they've created all kinds of tools that help them do that, including things like a giant open source ecosystem. So if you're building software nowadays, let's say the analog is you're starting a chip design. On the chip design world, I go to Cadence, or I go to Synopsys, or my big IP suppliers. I have to look through their catalogs and pick all these IP blocks I'm going to buy. If I'm starting a software startup, I go to GitHub and I search for what I want, right? I need a web server, a database, whatever it is. And they're out there freely available. It's this common infrastructure that everyone can build on. And it has accelerated everything massively. And we're just starting to see it happen for silicon. In fact, there's an organization called the FOSSI Foundation, and Free and Open Source Silicon Foundation. And a lot of the people there, they're software engineers. So
it makes sense then, doesn't it? Of course, all of this progress and this celebrating the small wins. How do you foster a culture of innovation within Deca Technologies, ensuring that your teams are feeling like empowered to push the boundaries?
So there's all kinds of probably the more expected answers to that question of open discussions and how you manage your team and stuff. But when you have a lot of smart engineers on your team, I find one of the most important things is make sure you have really fun problems.
Yeah. Nothing mundane. Yeah.
Right. And if you're really looking for innovation, well, you better have a problem that's not solvable with bog standard methods.
Yes.
Or usually when someone tells you, that's not possible, or or you have a supplier tell you impossible, you might have a good problem.
Yeah.
And we have a pretty good example of that in our history too. So when we first started doing adaptive patterning, we create a new layout, a new GDS file, like for every wafer. Okay. And it's a whole wafer. So normally a chip designer, they create one of these, they meticulously go through the design process, you tape out, and what you tape out is a picture of one chip. And then that goes to make your reticle and your mask, and you repeat that on the wafer. When we use the maskless lithography, it's all digital. So we have to draw the whole wafer. And every single one of those is going to be different. So these files became really huge. And on top of that, we said, Well, we need to expose or, draw on a wafer every 30 seconds, a completely new pattern, because we're going to optimize each one. And so we went to our supplier for the equipment and we said, okay, today this conversion could take 2 or 3 hours to get ready to expose one wafer. We need it in 30 seconds. And this was with a supplier in Japan, and it was not possible. That was literally the response we got. And we said, okay, well, we're going to ask for the specifications for the files that drive your machine. We'll solve this problem.
Okay, and then?
And so actually now that's one of the core products at Deca.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and that's one not a lot of people know about yet, but when you are using maskless lithography, one of the key processes is converting polygons, so shapes of your layout, to little digital pixels, just like a bitmap image on your computer.
Yes.
That controls the actual exposure of a wafer. And that's terapixels of data that drives these things. And we convert it all in 30 seconds. And that's a team of software engineers working on a problem directly in the middle of semiconductor equipment. That's makes a big innovation possible.
How long ago was this discovered? Or
that was 2015. So that's what I'll say. It's become a core part of our technology since then.
Remarkable.
But whenever you have someone who tells you, not possible.
Yeah.
You might have a good problem.
Yeah. I mean, this is what you call, there's a theory of like consensus versus non-consensus. And if you're doing the non-consensus activities where people are like, this isn't going to work, right? This is what we call disruptive technology.
Yep. And a lot of it helps a lot too to bring people in from other industries. Right. So I feel very strongly about this in chip design, for example. Today it takes, for leading chips, it takes hundreds of millions of dollars to design a chip. A lot of that's paying people, paying engineers, verification and functional design and all these different positions. And software engineers face very similar challenges. They're working on giant systems, like the code base that powers Facebook or Meta or Twitter. They're not small. They're really complicated beasts. And they've developed all these methods to help manage that complexity, but still move quickly. And we're just at the beginning of pulling some of that into how we do chip. So I really think the chip designer of the future will probably look a little more like a software engineer.
Yeah. I mean, would you say, I don't know how would you define Deca? I mean, would you define Deca as an OSAT? Would you define it as an IP licensing?
I would define us as a technology provider.
As a technology, define that.
Sure. So it's a superset of an IP licensing company. And what that means is we don't just go out and license IP and say, good luck, here's a patent, have fun. We actually continue to develop the technology, and we do what's called a technology transfer. So that means I'm going to teach you how to do all these processes. Here's the 100-page specification on how to buy that equipment. Here's all the recipe parameters to set up that piece of equipment. So it's more like getting a factory-started kit in a box, not just a bundle of legal patents.
Yeah.
You got to have both,
Yeah. So I mean, currently at this time and moment, Craig, what is the key challenges that you're facing from technology? What are your biggest headaches that you're going through?
So, going forward, getting bigger and bigger. So of course, scaling down. I mean, that's been the challenge of the semiconductor industry forever, and it's going to be for a long time to come. Same applies to packaging, 10 micron lines to 2 micron lines to half micron lines, same thing. But we do have a unique bit where we're running out of the ability to make transistors smaller at the same rate. So actually, if you look at leading products like AI processors, they're getting bigger.
Yeah.
It used to be all the chips get smaller, right? Or at least stay the same size and have more stuff in it, but they're growing, and it's kind of like overflow. And we're having to really change the way we think about package design, because designing a 10 millimeter or 15 millimeter package that goes on a smartphone, very different than designing some of these AI chip companies. They want a 300 by 300 millimeter chip.
Correct. Yeah.
That's a completely different regime. So, but
do you see that it is possible though, is it? Nothing is impossible, right?
Well, at Deca, we expand what's possible. So,
intriguing. So, what would you say? I mean, like reflecting on your career, Craig, from creating an app that was very successful to your current situation right now, what are you most proud of? Like, what are you proud of?
I am, so on a personal level, I'm proud of being crazy enough to take on these impossible problems. But if, looking back, there are plenty of safer career options.
Sure.
Probably plenty of more lucrative career options too. A lot of people getting in the software at the same time did really well for themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But
gross profit margins are much higher. That's why. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's a reason Google can pay so much.
Correct. Yeah.
But really, at the end of the day, if you're solving really cool problems, and usually those come with a not possible attached to them at first, it can be very rewarding. And naturally, when you're solving cool problems tend to attract smart people, capable people. And when you're surrounded by people like that, it makes it a lot, it's not the only thing you need, but it sure really helps you grow a good career.
And for you now, I mean, what do you still hope to accomplish?
I would like to see a day when a single engineer can accomplish for a reasonable budget a maybe not leading node, but a impactful chip tape out. So, and whether that's through assembling chiplets or making design tools that much easier to use, whatever it is, I'd like to see the day when that happens.
Why?
Because it happened for circuit boards, and I'm an electronics hobbyist. I still build electronics in my free time. It's just fun. And it used to be, for example, in the 1990s, even the early 2000s, let's say you wanted to make a circuit board, not a chip, not a package, a circuit board. You're talking thousands of dollars. And as a kid or as a hobbyist, it's kind of prohibitive. Nowadays, you can get a circuit board built, not only built, but components soldered onto it for $10, $20. And it's opened a universe of all these people contributing, people who would normally not actually ever build something electronic. And it lowers the barrier to innovation and applying technology to specific problems. Because I think we're a little bit past the era where we can make one chip that solves everyone's problem. Or where someone who has a very specific problem, they can't afford that chip to solve the problem. And now we're in the era where we're going to have specific chips for everything. And I think a lot about how now there's open source EDA software you can use to design a circuit board. Anyone can send it off to get manufactured very affordably. And a high school kid, a middle school kid can even design an electronic product nowadays. It's amazing, right? Yeah. It's like a new infrastructure for our economy. New infrastructure for, the future. But when it comes to silicon, we're still infants there. So one day, and high schoolers have already designed chips now. So there's a guy, Matthew Venn, he runs a program called Tiny Tape Out. And for a very reasonable fee or paid for through school, you get a little slice of a chip. You do a chip design. And middle schoolers and high schoolers have now designed successfully circuits taped out on chips.
Oh, really?
Yep. So I'm hopeful, and I think it's coming. But I would like to see the day when starting a chip startup.
Yeah.
Today, you want to go into a business of silicon, you probably get one tape out for your VC funding. Software, I just keep iterating, right? I can completely change my app tomorrow. How can we make that possible for
the silicon? Remarkable. Wonderful, Craig. To wrap up this discussion, it's a wonderful podcast. I mean, I could go on and on and on. We need to do another one. What's next for you personally and with Deca Technologies?
So that overlaps a lot at the moment. So there's been a lot of renewed interest in packaging with the CHIPS Act, with DoD, with and it's not just the US. There's equivalent versions of the CHIPS Act around the world. So we're very busy enabling more manufacturers. So packaging, advanced packaging will become more available. And maybe that'll come first. So maybe first step chiplets, next step one-click silicon.
One-click silicon, that's the goal. That is the goal. I'm going to remember this for the next 5 to 10 years, or one-click silicon. We have a tradition on the show whereby the last interviewer leaves a question for the next interviewer. And the question I have here is Ron Hummler.
Oh, I know very well.
His question is, what major milestones do you see in your immediate future?
Immediate future, bringing online, I'll go out there and say 4 more advanced packaging companies that aren't doing it currently. So really push the industry forward, we need more availability so more people can design high-end chips or not so high-end chips. So we need more manufacturers, and we're working to make that happen.
Marvelous. So Craig, I'm going to give you the book, and if you're going to write down...
What a privilege here.
For the next person.
Uh-oh.
Could be Tim Olsen. Give me a pay rise, Tim. Thank you. Great. Thank you for coming on to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. Very excited to see what your future is going to look like and what you're going to accomplish. Very intrigued to have you again on the show and dig a little bit more deeper. It was a very riveting discussion, and I hope it inspires many out there that software and hardware can go hand in hand in partnership. So
we need more software engineers in the field.
Exactly. So thank you again, and I wish you and the team at Deca all the success for many years to come.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig.